Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakaruttam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi abahu purushakaram Shankhachakrasidharanam Sahasra Shirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Harihi Om Vasudevasutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsaha Sudhir Bhokta Dugdham Gitamritam Mahat Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. So, in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, in the 4th chapter, which we are studying, we had discussed in great detail the idea of avatara, incarnation. When the divine wisdom, awareness, the cosmic awareness, consciousness descends into the mind, into the understanding, into the individual consciousness, it is known as avatara, which means descent, because avatara means descent. And this is a very central idea of the Indian traditions, because there are many temples that are dedicated to some of these avatars. Even though avatars can be infinite in numbers, there is no count, uncountable, they cannot be counted, one cannot count them, but some of them, the most important one, have been chosen for the purpose of meditation. We discussed all these in our previous classes. The next shloka is about a very important contribution that an avatara makes to the society. The work, it describes the work that he does, which leads him to be declared an avatara. There are 3 works that have been mentioned in this shloka, because one of the most important contribution that an avatara makes to the society is what Sri Krishna had already talked about in the 3rd chapter. The word that he used there was loka sangraha. It was on page number 61 of this book, in the 25th verse of the 3rd chapter of the previous chapter. Arjuna, as the unwise act with attachment, so should the wise man, with a view to maintain the world order, act without attachment. what he said there was that an ignorant being, when he wants to get something as a result of his work, he works ceaselessly. He puts all his effort into that work so that he can gain something in response to that. A wise man should work equally hard like an ignorant man. He should work equally hard, but not for a selfish purpose, but for loka sangraha. And loka sangraha, translated here with a view to maintain the world order, it simply in Sanskrit, put into very simple words, it means the upliftment of the society. Sangraha either bringing them together. Society is generally divided. On a very individual level, we have created these walls within us, which are there in every home, in every suburb, in every city, and between nations. But these walls, they have their origins within the hearts of the people. Otherwise, there are no boundaries. If you look at the earth from space, there are no boundaries, no, what do you call it in English? The boundaries of nations. Borders, yes. The borders are not visible from above. These are man-created. The borders exist in the hearts of the people, and they are just manifested out there. Human beings are forced to follow them. Birds, even birds, they don't obey these borders. So the work of a wise man is to do this loka sangraha, bringing together of societies in which lies the upliftment of society. And Krishna himself gives us an example there in the 3rd chapter. He himself gave it as an example that, Arjuna, I have nothing to achieve in my life. I am completely fulfilled. In one of the next shlokas, Name parthasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana nanavaptam avatavyam vartaiva cha karmani. Just let me show you. Yes, it's on page number 60, verse number 22, 23 and 24 of the 3rd chapter. These 3 shlokas in which he presents himself as an example that there is no duty. Name parthasti kartavyam trishulokeshu kinchana. There is no duty for me. Nana vaptam avaptavyam. Nor there is anything to be obtained which has not already been obtained by me. I am completely fulfilled in the depth of my heart. There is no desire left. Yet Varta eva cha karmani, I am dedicated ceaselessly, completely to my work, because I know yadihyaham navarteyam jadu karmanyatandritaha. If I would not engage in work without becoming tired constantly, mama vartmanu vartante manushyaha partha sarvashaha, those people who follow me, they would also stop working, and as a result of that, these worlds would fall into ruin. Utsideyu reme lokah na kuryam karma chedaham. If I, the divine consciousness which sets everything into motion, and every existence, everything that exists around us everywhere exists because of that constant work, because of that constant motion that happens on a cosmic level and from a cosmic level up to the atomic level. Everywhere movement, constant movement is taking place. And if that consciousness, when it manifests itself onto this planet, it has to work ceaselessly with uttermost devotion. Otherwise, sankarasya chakartasyam, I would create a disordered state of life by not working, by becoming unnecessarily dependent, and upahanyamimaha prajaha, I would lead to the destruction of the creation that I have created. So he himself presents it as a great ideal that I myself, even though I have nothing to achieve, I work with complete dedication. And this idea we find in the Vedas, akshayirma divyah, don't play dices, which simply means that don't desire for wealth which you can acquire without working hard for it. But krishimit krishasva, sow the seed and till the ground, which symbolically means work hard to actually create it. Not finding the easy way to achieve something in one's life that doesn't lead to development within a person's life. So, in other words, avatara is not someone who teaches in words. Rama doesn't teach. Sri Krishna gave a teaching in the form of the Bhagavad Gita. This was just a momentary thing. But otherwise, all his life and all the previous avatars that we mentioned, we have discussed in great detail, none of them has really given a teaching in words. It is their life, it is what they did, it is how they lived, which becomes an inspiration. So they teach through their own example. So let us pronounce the shloka. This shloka presents an idea that occurs in the Upanishads originally, which has been talked about, consciousness, that this consciousness which resides in our heart, this comes in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is a detailed explanation of Ishavasya Upanishad. Ishavasya Upanishad, the one that we are studying, is the second smallest one, and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is the biggest one. And the biggest one is like a detailed explanation of the first one, the second smallest one. And there this discussion comes that this consciousness which resides in this emptiness of a human being's heart, which simply means that is, although it is omnipresent, that is where it can be experienced, that is where one can become aware of its presence. That consciousness is the same entity which is like, the word that is used there is setu. Setu means a dam that stops the water from flowing into the fields and creating disorder, creating havoc, but rather keeping it under control and then using it for the benefit of society, using the water for the benefit of that society. So setu means a dam. So esha setuhu, this is the setu, the dam, vidharanaha, which upholds law, justice, morality, and the limits of propriety. That esham lokanam asambhedaya, so this creation does not fall upon each other, but remains in proper order. That is the idea of setu, which has been presented in the Upanishads. That is the closest that the Upanishads get to this idea that Sri Krishna is about to describe in the next shloka. Let us pronounce it and then we will study it. Sorry? Shloka number 8 of the 4th chapter, on page number 73. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha Vinashaya cha. Vinashaya cha. Dushkritam. 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 Dharma samsthapanarthaya. Dharma samsthapanarthaya. Dharma samsthapanarthaya. Sambhavami. 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 Yuge. 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 Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. First of all, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam. This is also the slogan of Indian police. Many times they write Paritranaya sadhunam, for the protection of the good and for the destruction of the wicked. They many times have seen they write it in their logo. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam. Paritranaya, let us understand it. Paritrana means protection. Paritranaya sadhunam. Sadhu, now what does the word sadhu mean? Sadhu of the good ones. What does that mean? Because sadhu shabdaha shobhana vachi. Sadhu means good, beautiful. And Shankaracharya explains this as sadhu. The word sadhu in itself can mean two things: dharma, righteousness. We have already discussed dharma in great detail in our previous Bhagavad Gita class, and Brahma, the quintessence of the Upanishads, which is pure consciousness. These two things are the most beautiful, the most auspicious things in this world. And someone, sadhukari, someone who leads a life, tries to lead a life of righteousness for the sake of experiencing that universal consciousness within himself, such a person is called sadhu. Another meaning that Keshava Kashmiri Bhattacharya, again a 15th century great devotional master of India, he points out that sadhu is someone who is samadarshi, someone who looks at all with an equal eye, an equal vision. This is what Sri Krishna himself will explain in the 5th chapter, that someone for whom, whether it is a great scholar of the Vedas, who is a great scholar, who is not only a great scholar but is also extremely humble, such a person, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and the human who stands on the last rung of the social ladder, Shvapaka, someone because he has nothing to eat or simply because of his dietary habits, even doesn't care if he has to eat the flesh of a dog which in turn, in at least when it is natural, if you allow a dog to live a natural life, then he feeds on carcasses, dead bodies, he feeds on excrement and all these things, and he eats the flesh of that Shvapaka, even such a person. And there were some communities in ancient India who used to have such dietary habits and led a completely unclean life known as Shvapaka or Chandala. Even they, for a sadhu, starting from the greatest scholar who is the most respected, even kings bow down in front of him, from him up to this human being and everything that comes in between. Even Shri Krishna has given the 3 types of animals: sattvika animal, cow; rajasic animal, elephant; and the tamasika animal, a dog. All these animals he has given example. Someone who has a vision of equality towards all of these. Such a person is called Samadarshi, and such a Samadarshi is a sadhu. Who in other words is aware of the divine presence within every being. It doesn't matter what the container looks like. He's aware of what is contained within it, what is present within it. And this, to bring this awareness even to one of the greatest reformers in India's history, Shankaracharya, who is like the supreme guru of all the monastic traditions here in India. If you see someone in a red dress, directly or indirectly, the tradition of that person goes back to Shankaracharya at some point. This is the influence that he had, because he organized the monastic traditions of Hinduism around the 8th century. And he was a great personality, a very great scholar. When he came to Banaras, the great scholars of Banaras went into debate with him. He had to convince them that his understanding of the Upanishads, the Vedas, is the correct one. So he had to debate with them, and finally when everybody accepted his understanding and his interpretation of the Upanishads, as he walks out and all the great scholars of Banaras are following him, in that moment a Chandala, such as Shwapaka, comes in front of him. Now he does not tell him to step aside so that he can walk through, fearing that because of his impure being. He rather steps himself aside and says, yours is the first right, go, take the path. So he steps aside, and in that moment that Chandala asks him, Annamaya Dannamaya Mathva Chaitanyameva Chaitanyat Kimbho Dvijavara Duri Kartum Vanchasi Kim Bruhi Gacha Gacheti. This is the question that he asked. What do you want to separate from yourself? Do you want to separate this physical body from your physical body, where your physical body is equally impure like my physical body? Or do you want to separate the consciousness within me from the consciousness within you, which you have yourself declared to be one and the same? What do you want to separate here that you are telling me to go? And then Shankaracharya, in that moment, while all these great scholars which he just had won over in his debate, in front of all of them, he falls into his feet. And it's a beautiful scene when we see Shankaracharya. There is a beautiful movie on Shankaracharya's life, all made in Sanskrit. I think the only film in India ever to be produced completely in Sanskrit, beautiful Sanskrit. Yeah, they have subtitles. Yeah, they have subtitles with English subtitles. It is actually we can maybe at some point we can because they are beautiful messages. No. It has. I've seen it with subtitles. Yes, but many times it would require like stopping for a minute and discussing what is being talked about. You know, it's quite deep. So we can. Yeah, we can maybe.
English or Hindi subtitles?
English subtitles. English subtitles, yes. It's a beautiful documentary about his life. And then he composed this beautiful prayer, which is known as Manisha Panchaka, the 5 verses of deep insight, in which every verse ends Chandalostu dvijostu guru rityesha manisha mama. Such a person, whether it is a great scholar of the Vedas or if it is a Chandala, if he has this awareness in his life, then I consider him as my master. I consider him as equal to be a guru. So he composed this beautiful prayer known as Manisha Panchakam. So someone who has developed this view of equality, social differences are a reality. Whatever we try, capitalism did not solve the problem. It just made a few people rich, and the divide between the poorest of the poor and the richest of the richest has simply increased. Socialism did not solve the problem. Whatever we might try to do is somehow, this seems to be a reality, but we in our understanding, through these teachings, we at least as an individual, we can develop this vision of equality towards all beings. This is, if the Sanskrit word, for example, for socialism or communism is Samyavada. Samyavada, the Hindi word which is used. What Gita speaks about is not Samyavada, but it is Samatvavada, which is the same thing. But it just speaks of looking at all these beings with a vision of equality and to be inspired to serve them. Sarva bhuta hite rataha. This is the second thing then the Bhagavad Gita, to which the Bhagavad Gita comes, is Sarva bhuta hite rataha, constantly engaged in the well-being of all beings. And that constant engagement should not be limited by any religious, ethnographic or racial or national concern, but it should be directed towards all, towards, actually not even towards all, but the greatest concern should be the poorest of the poor, the most downtrodden one. That is where our concern has to start. That is what Mahatma Gandhi's practice of the Bhagavad Gita was about. So someone who has developed this attitude in his life, this is what the word sadhu actually stands for. This is the definition of the word sadhu. So when we speak of the sadhus, the sadhu babas, then we might be using a very great word which had a deep connotation in an entirely different context, which has nothing to do with what we are using it for. So for the protection of such beings who are doing good work, there comes a moment. I mean, there was, when you think there was this amazing priest working in homes in Syria, the work that he was doing for all the societies, for the Muslims, for the Christians, for everybody there, selflessly. I got interested in his work back when I was in the Holy Land and reading about, asking people about noble people in Syria, in Palestine, in Israel, and his name kept on coming into my ears. And that is where I got interested, and later on I got even more interested in him after I realized that much of his work he does through teaching yoga, yoga asanas. I can't remember now his name. No. I'm speaking about someone in Syria. Someone in Syria in Homs. And even after Homs was under siege, he decided, he was not from Syria, he was, I think, an Italian or something like this. I can't remember his original nationality. But he said, I have been with these people for 20, 30 years, now I cannot leave them in the most difficult times. And he decided to stay there till he, unfortunately in BBC we heard the news that he was killed, he was shot. He was deliberately shot. And that was the day, because I do have some friends through RIM who were also, we had interesting discussions because they were interested in Upanishads, and I always used to say, whenever in my life I get a chance to come, this is the man that I want to meet. And so there comes a moment when some protection is required. Otherwise, such noble people become the first easy target. And that is the second thing that a noble person does not, also has to do. Vinashaya jadushkratam, the destruction of the wicked. For the destruction of the wicked, those who perform bad deeds, acts which are harmful to others. There is no hatred implied towards anyone even performing bad deeds. This is the beautiful thing of for example, Indian mythology, where even demons ultimately reach the same ultimate goal which the great yogis reach. It is a beautiful idea. Sometimes some people call it as Dvesha Yoga, when hatred becomes a means of yoga. Whatever emotion is there, let it be directed towards the divine. If even the strongest emotion of hatred is directed towards divine, and as a result of that a person is constantly in the awareness of that divinity, then even that leads that being towards unity, towards oneness. So there is no hatred towards the individual. There is just a sense of removing the impurity which is there, which can become harmful for the good, which can become harmful. So a person is only wicked, and the Bhagavad Gita makes it very clear towards the end of the 9th chapter that a person is only wicked as long as he performs a bad deed. The moment he repents, the moment he transforms, the moment he decides to change his life, then he is considered a sadhu. Then there should be no stigma on such a person of any kind. When I speak of stigma, then often to my mind comes Jean Valjean, this beautiful character of Les Miserables, who transforms from a thief into an amazing personality. The main character of Les Miserables, it's my father's most beloved book. I mean, one of his most beloved books. And he read it, of course. He used to carry it always with him. Because yes, of course, he read it. He's very, very fluent and very good in French. So he read it in French, and till now I have his copy of Les Miserables. And whenever somebody, because he cannot read himself, so if somebody that can read French comes to him, the first thing that I have to bring out is Les Miserables, and he wants him or her to read a few lines of this book. It's an extremely beautiful book. But exactly that stigma should not be there. That stigma.
That said that there's no sinner without a future, no saint without a past.
I can't remember. Beautiful.
To Oscar Wilde or to Saint Augustine. And I've never really found the...
Who is this? But it's a beautiful quotation. It's Augustine. It's a beautiful quotation. Really beautiful. I mean, even in India, if you look at the life, for example, of Sage Valmiki, the author of he was terrible. He was terrible. And yet, when he transformed, so Krishna in the 9th chapter makes very clear, apichet sudurachara. Even if someone is of the most vile conduct, bhajate mam ananya bhag, if he experiences a change of heart and serves the divinity, worships the divinity with undistracted devotion, sadhureva samantavya, then he should be accepted like a sadhu. Samyak vyavasito hisaha, because he has chosen the right resolution in his life. He has chosen the right resolution. So there is no hatred towards the wicked. But yes, when somebody deliberately chooses to harm others, then something has to be done to protect those who are unnecessarily being harmed. It is with that purpose that a Kshatriya like Arjuna, whose duty is to fight, he has to keep this in his mind, to uphold the order of law and justice. Dharma samsthapanarthaya. The third thing that I do is dharma samsthapanarthaya, for the establishment of righteousness. Dharma, we already discussed what it means, and samsthapana means to establish it. Sambhavami yuge yuge. For this purpose, I come into being in every age. You see, there are three aspects of God in the Vedic understanding. One is the creator, the second one, the one who organizes everything, who sustains, the sustainer, and the destroyer. The one who creates has also the full right to destroy it. So sometimes people also, even though the word God does not stand for this, actually it's interesting, I was looking at the etymology of the word God. It originally comes from the Sanskrit, the cognate of the Sanskrit root hu, from which means to invoke. And in Sanskrit we have two words, huta, which means the invoked deity, and puruhuta, invoked by many, which is one of the names that has been used in the Upanishads for the divine. So, ha easily becomes ga. Homa, from the same root homa, which is worship, in Japan becomes goma. So, ha easily becomes ga, and from this root, that is what the Oxford Dictionary tells us, that it is cognate of this root from which the word God has been derived. However, many people say that G stands for generator, O stands for organizer, and D stands for destroyer. In other words, the creating principle, Brahma, the sustaining principle, Vishnu, and the destroying principle, Shiva. These three words which I use, the Trimurtis, the three forms of the divine, of the same one supreme divinity. So this is the work of the organizing principle, the principle that has to keep organization in one's life. So this shloka certainly has wider social implications as it is applied socially, but for a sadhaka like us, this has a deep personal implication, where the sadhus and the wicked are not somewhere out there, but they are within us, in the form of our own tendencies. And this takes us back to the Upanishadic idea of Deva and Asura, where the Devas, the divine radiant beings, are not somewhere out there, but they are within us, our own good inclinations, good tendencies, good thoughts. That is what the word Deva stands for. And Asura are the bad tendencies, the harmful tendencies. And what is being mentioned in this shloka has to attack that. And when it attacks that, then it transforms the human being on his deepest level, because ultimately it is just that wickedness in thoughts, in inclinations, in tendencies that gets strengthened in the individual and then eventually comes up in the society. all these individuals that are committed to do so much harm to the society, this wickedness has got strengthened in them. So the idea here is that this constant fight which the Upanishads speak of, Devasura Sangrama, this constant fight between Deva and Asura, between these two tendencies which exist within us. In Upanishadic mythology, they are called the children of Prajapati. Prajapati is the individual human being, someone who is capable of acting and thinking. He is a Prajapati. And the Asuras, the demons, are the elder brothers, and the Devas are the younger brothers. This is strange. Why is it once? Because once the Asuras, those tendencies we accumulate naturally. We don't have to do anything to accumulate them. They come to us very naturally. They don't need to be cultivated. Actually, even the word demon, translation always creates problem. I don't know what the word demon, when we hear the word demon, this is what we think of, somebody with two horns on top of his head and something like that. But the Sanskrit word asura simply means, asu means our senses. And Ra means someone who is completely engaged in the gratification of his senses. The only thing that he thinks is that these are my desires, I have to fulfill them, and whatever that means, whatever that costs, I don't care. I will just achieve it in my life, even if it means killing somebody else. Whatever that means, just my gratification, my sense gratification. Such a person is called Asura. The word will come. We will discuss it in the Upanishads. Asurya namate loka, in the third shloka of Ishavasya Upanishad, very soon. So, that is what the word Asura simply means. And these tendencies come to us very naturally. As we grow up in our society, if we are not instructed, if we don't make an effort, and others can only teach us. Ultimately, we have to make an effort, and when a person starts walking in the light of wisdom, he realizes that he has to do something to cultivate the good tendencies. And when a person starts cultivating virtues in his life, for that a person has to make an effort. It's very natural, because darkness comes very naturally. You don't do anything, the room becomes dark. To create light in that room, a lot of effort has to be made. Whether if you have to rub 2 wood sticks for 1 hour, today we think that you just have to push on a button and lo, there is light, but just think the great amount of effort that somebody else had to do to build up these nuclear stations or power plants or whatever that means, and how much also negative impact that has on society. We have actually to sacrifice a lot as humanity to get that energy out of nature and to create light. So for light, we have to make an effort. But the beautiful thing is that whenever light is created, it always destroys darkness within a split second. Then darkness cannot exist. So this is the perpetual internal conflict between darkness and light, between the Asuras and Devas, that the Upanishads speak of. The Upanishads speak of them on a deep internal level. If you look carefully at the first five avatars, the demons that they have slain, they are tendencies, very clearly tendencies within us. But the later 5 avatars which we discussed, there the demons seem to represent human beings, but only on a superficial level. Even in the birth of Krishna, the demons that Krishna slays in the story of Krishna's childhood, where he slays Kamsa, Chanura and all these are not These are not external human beings. And if they are external human beings, what if we kill them, what does it help us in knowing it? Why in the beginning of every class, of every Bhagavad Gita class, we recite this prayer, Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam, the destroyer, the slayer of Kamsa and Chanura. Why? Of what use is it? If he killed somebody 5,500 years ago, what use is it for us? Why do we pronounce? Because everything in Krishna's life, everything that is presented through this story has a deep internal spiritual significance, which is what we find in some of the later Upanishads or secret teachings. So for example, if you look at Krishna Upanishad, one Upanishad that discusses the secret teachings of Krishna's life, this is one of the Upanishads. There you will find what Kamsa, what Chanura, what all these stand for. So there is this beautiful statement that Lobha Krodhadayo Daityaha, all these demons that are slain by Krishna, they are none others but our wild tendencies such as greed, anger, hatred, selfishness, ignorance, and pride. These 6. What does the individual one stand? The name Chanura, which we Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam. This Chanura, he stands for Dvesha, hatred. So Shri Krishna, in the story he destroys this great wrestler in Mathura who represents Dvesha, who represents hatred. What does Kamsa stand for? For example, Kamsa Chanura Mardanam, this king of Mathura. What does that change? What does that? Kalihi Kamsaha Sabhupati, the darkness of ignorance. That was the leader of our life. That was the ruler of our life, because everything before this light descended upon us was decided in that darkness by results, by effects created by that darkness of ignorance. That darkness was the supreme ruler of our life. Krishna, after Mathura is the capital, Kamsa is the king, and he represents, the capital represents the city, the big city represents always the physical body, and the ruler is Kamsa, which is ruling, which is deciding what to do. All the senses and all the tendencies, all are engaged in vile acts. These are his accompanying demons. And then that ignorance, ultimately, which the light of awareness, which the light of knowledge completely destroys, that is the destruction of Kamsa. So in this way, all these characters of Krishna Leela, of Krishna's life, whether it is Krishna's own father, Vasudeva, which symbolizes the experience of oneness, the experience of unity, which is the quintessence of the Vedas, and Devaki, which represents the deep insight, the deep understanding into the nature of pure consciousness and into the nature of Om, what Om stands for. It is in the union of these two that Krishna is born. So this is what Krishna stands for. So like this, the whole story, then there are these, I can talk of it because I talked a little bit of this yesterday. Often we hear of the 16,108 queens of Krishna. People sometimes, what is this? Yeah, his wives, his gopis, whatever you call them, his gopis, his cowherdesses, his queens. What do they stand for? Krishna Upanishad again makes it clear. Why this exact number 16,108? Why this exact number? I will not go into 108, but I will talk just simply about 16,000. 16,000 in the Vedas there are 100,000 verses altogether collectively, and 80,000 verses are about Karmakanda, rituals. 16,000 verses are about upasana, deep meditation. And 4,000 verses are about the experience of the rishis, Jnanakanda. That is the final experience. So, these 16,000 verses which are about meditation, what are they ultimately meditating upon? It is that supreme divinity. And Rik, the Sanskrit word for prayer, is a feminine word. And these riches, therefore, the gopis, they stand. Ask anyone in Vrindavan about somebody who has a little bit of understanding of the life of Krishna. If you ask him, he will readily say that, oh, these all gopis, they stand for the Vedic riches. That is what they stand for. But when people with their defiled mind look at things, they start seeing their own defilement in all these stories, and then the deepest esoteric teaching of Krishna's life, not in his words, but what is known as Rasa Leela, which is the culmination of experience of bliss that a person has in deepest meditation, which is centered on the idea of rasa, the experience of joy and bliss within a person's life, discussed in the Upanishads. And this is the enactment of that in which Radha, Krishna, and all the gopis, they dance together on Sharat Purnima, in the night of Purnima, for a complete 1 month, which has been symbolically presented by this story of Rasa Leela within 5 chapters of the Bhagavatam, which for the devotional tradition is the summum bonum of the devotional traditions. This word today in Indian media is used to describe if there is an unlawful relationship between a well-known personality, or then it would be said that he's having his Ras Leela with that and that particular person. That is how the understanding has shifted and gone into I don't know what direction. Yeah. This word, which is the deepest word of the devotional traditions, and yet it is used in this context sometimes on media channels. Earlier, at least, I saw it. I was shocked, because for us it means something so deep, and Krishna and his whole story stands for that. However, coming back to our discussion, everything, and that is the reason that Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly the 10th, the 11th and the 12th books of the Bhagavatam, are so dearly loved by even the most enlightened saints and sages of India. One of the names of Bhagavatam is Paramahamsi Samhita, the book that is of Paramahamsas. Paramahamsa means the great swan. And the great swan represents for a person who, while swimming in water, completely is detached from that water. It can, whenever it wants to leave, it can go into the heights, and not a single drop of that water will be attached to that swan. It will just naturally fall away from it. These are known as Paramahamsas. Paramahamsa is really the highest word that you can give to a sage, a saint. The great swan, Paramahamsa. The greatest sage in the Upanishadic traditions is Paramahamsa. And the Bhagavatam is called Paramahamsi Samhita. The Samhita, the the text of the Paramahamsas, because only they, from their own experience, can go into the deepest significance of what Krishna's every step of life stands for in the Bhagavatam. What you see in pictures, what you see in statues, what we all this is extremely superficial. This is just outward, to give something to those who cannot go into that depth. But that is the real depth of Krishna's life. That is what Krishna stands for, and that is the reason they, even after they have studied all the Upanishads, they have studied all the Vedas, they have meditated on everything, they enjoy the stories, the pastimes of Krishna's life. Because to others they sound like pastimes, to them they sound about something deep within themselves. That is what is sometimes referred to as Nitya Rasa Leela, when we speak of great saints as being completely merged in the Rasa Leela that happens within themselves. Or Nitya Leela Leena, somebody who is completely merged in the Leela that happens within himself. So ultimately, that is what Krishna's symbolism stands for. I think, with my understanding, on one side, the culmination of symbolism of the ancient Vedic scriptures is found in Om. That is the highest symbol. The deeper we understand it, the more we understand it, we realize its depth. And of later texts, I think the deepest symbolism is presented by this one personality, Krishna. You may look upon him as a person, but that would be a very superficial understanding of him. I have to refer to him as if he is a person, but that is a deep concept, a deep internal experience that he stands for. And that is when he becomes the most meaningful. So that is what actually takes us to the next shloka, that someone who understands in essence that my birth and my acts are divine in nature. He does not look at them as something external, but as something deeply internal, deeply divine. When a person starts looking at my life and my deeds in such a way, then tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti surjuna, then he becomes one with me. He gets united with me. He becomes one. So it is here that Sri Krishna mentions this in the next shloka, which we will study in our next class. So therefore it doesn't matter whether he was a person, he actually lived or not. All these things don't matter. The fact is that what he stands for exists within every being, and that simply has to be identified. That simply a person has to become aware of it. After a person becomes aware of it, whether you label it as Krishna or as something else, it doesn't really matter, because these are just labels. The thing is what we are talking about by these words, by these symbols. That is the ultimate thing. If that defies us and we are lost in symbols, then however great devotee of Krishna we might have become, then we have lost the game. That we have lost the final purpose. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi.